Welcome to the Western Baul podcast series, with talks on traditional spiritual teaching and its application in the world today. The intention of the series is to offer something useful for those who are drawn to study themselves and engage practice on the spiritual path. New talks are posted twice each month. The content of the talks is for informational purposes only, and not to provide any kind of counseling, medical, or professional advice. This podcast is titled, The Essence of Creation is Transformation. The talk was given by Nachama Greenwald on March 29, 2025, via Zoom. Nachama is a physical therapist, editor, and musician who for 17 years was a member of the Shri blues band, which performed Western Baul music. In this talk, she discusses the transformational cycle of birth, death, and rebirth that we see all around us and experience in our own lives. She speaks about the liminal state between death and rebirth, about grief, and about transformational moments when we experience our unitive nature. Nachama notes that transformation involves a fundamental shift in our worldview. During the presentation, she uses examples from her own process and refers to the works of the scholar and storyteller Michael Meade, the psychotherapist Francis Weller, the Franciscan priest Richard Rohr, the writer on transpersonal psychology Ken Wilber, the Buddhist teacher Henry Shukman, the French teacher Arnaud Desjardins, and her own teacher, Lee Lozowick. If there is benefit in this talk for you, please consider sharing the link to it or writing a review on social media or on one of the podcast platforms. Nachama Greenwald.
I am very happy that you all are here with me and that we are here together. And I hope that you find something that is not just interesting, but is useful for your own work, your own path. That is my wish and my prayer. And first of all, speaking of prayers, I want us to send our prayers to Myanmar. There was a very, very devastating earthquake there. They're really struggling right now. So just thinking about them as well. And also, before we begin, I want to acknowledge both our ancestors and the rightful caretakers of the land that we live on. So a wise person once said that an ancestor is anything that has come before us. So that means the sun is our ancestor, the moon is our ancestor, the stars are our ancestors. So in that context, I want to acknowledge our ancestors of the natural world as well as our wise human ancestors, and to acknowledge that we are on native land here, which in Arizona is the land of the Yavapai, Havasupai, and Hualapai people. So the title of the talk is The Essence of Creation is Transformation. There's a lot to say about this topic, but I'll talk about the things that have been most meaningful for me in my own transformational process over the years. And rather than this talk being about me just presenting information to you, it's more of an invitation to open the door into mystery with you that we walk through together. And that mystery being the mystery of the spiritual path that we're on, which is the path of radical curiosity, of investigation, the path of the longing for truth, and for a deeper understanding of what a human life is. So I hope that we can walk through this door together tonight and see what unfolds. There are some questions that we will be circumambulating throughout the evening. Questions like, why do we need to transform? Why is it important for our spiritual growth? What creates the need for transformation? And what is the relationship between transformation and evolution? So we'll be looking at these from different angles, including our own personal experiences. And I'm going to give you one of the take-home messages of this talk right off the bat, which is that when we come through the transformational process, it brings greater clarity, healing, and resilience into our lives. And it also brings forth creative growth into the world. So it's like this new creative energy is born. And this can be expressed through the arts. It can be expressed through service. It can be expressed through social action. And it can also just be how we are in our relationships, like being more open, more vulnerable, more authentic in our relationships. So we just show up differently. We're more present. That's also a creative kind of energy. It doesn't have to be through an artistic medium. And we see the cycles of birth and death and rebirth. We see them occurring in nature. We see it occurring in a very dramatic way on a global level and also on a personal level. Transformation is essential for the evolution and thriving of creation, which includes us as human beings. I mean, think about it. We don't want to be the same person at the end of our lives that we were 30 years ago. We want there to be change and evolution in our beings. And when we look at nature, we see this in motion, that it's activated ongoingly all the time. For example, the trees don't stay the same all year round. And there's so much beauty in that. There's beauty when the maple trees blaze red in the autumn, and there's beauty when the branches are naked and bare in the winter. So in other words, there is poignant, bittersweet beauty in impermanence and change, in light and shadow, in loss and death, as well as in the tender, vibrant leaves of new growth. I can look back at my own life and see that it has been characterized by ongoing cycles of death and rebirth. So this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. When I look back at my own life, I see that even though there were periods of relative stability and calm, that inevitably the cycle would start up again, as it does in all of our lives, triggered by some life event. For example, like the breakup of a significant relationship. That's just one example. And although I had an intimate relationship with this process because I saw it played out in my life over and over again, it's when I met my teacher, Lee Lozowick, that I began to understand that not only was this something that occurred in the life of a human being, but that it was actually an essential element of the spiritual path of spiritual growth, and one that could be engaged consciously and with intention. We would talk about making our commitment to transformation a priority in our lives. And he would speak about the process of transformation as being an alchemical one. And for it to actually occur at the level of consciousness, for it to reach the deeper levels of our being, there had to be some kind of a shakeup, some kind of a disruption of our usual routine, and a plunge into groundlessness. He said, strong medicine is needed, and such strong medicine is often quite dynamic, intense, even wild, and a bit untamed. So it can be, and it oftentimes is, a fiery alchemical process. And this strong medicine that he's talking about is actually provided by the forces and circumstances of life itself. And it becomes more of that fiery alchemical process when we work consciously with it and we use it as fuel for our spiritual growth. I'm pretty sure it was from Ken Wilber, this distinction between horizontal translation and vertical transformation. So horizontal translation refers to some kind of a lateral shift. So it's more about expanding or refining one's worldview or perspective without fundamentally changing it. So an example of that would be moving to a new house. And that, of course, as we know, can be significant, and there can be a lot going on for us in moving to a new resonance. Fundamentally, it's still a lateral move. But in vertical transformation, there's actually a leap to a new and a higher level of consciousness, which involves a radical shift in how we perceive and understand the world. So the transformation that Lee was interested in was the vertical one from the spiritual perspective. But we will see throughout this evening is what that involves. We don't just fly up into a new way of being. We have to go down. There's a descent. And if any of you are familiar with Michael Meade, he's a mythologist, he's a storyteller, he's a writer, and he says that in this descent, that we actually touch the roots of our being, which means that it's a very deep process. So we can't go up without first going down. So in the death phase of the process, we descend, we are brought down below the surface of our usual strategies, the personas, and adaptive behavior we've created in order to survive and protect ourselves. Something happens that overwhelms us. And I'll talk more about this a little bit later. So something happens that overwhelms us, for example, a health crisis or a divorce, and we experience a loss of stability. There's a crack in our identity and how we've defined ourselves, of who we thought we were. And when this occurs, there is an unraveling. Something is undone. And this can be a messy process. It's disorienting. Birth is messy, death is messy. The transformational process is messy too. But the beauty of this process is that, yes, we are undone, but then we are remade, because rebirth follows death always. Here's a poem by one of my favorite poets these days, David White. It's called Blessing of the Morning Light. And I read this at another talk I did a few months ago, but I really liked the poem, so I wanted to read it again. And it's a poem about light and darkness and transformation. The blessing of the morning light to you. May it find you even in your invisible appearances. May you be seen to have risen from some other place you know and have known in the darkness, and that carries all you need. May you see what is hidden in you as a place of hospitality and shadowed shelter. May what is hidden in you become your gift to give. May you hold that shadow to the light and the silence of that shelter to the world of the light. May you join every previous disappearance with this new appearance, this new morning, this being seen again, new and newly alive. So this is a poem about both the literal and metaphorical transformation of darkness into light. So literally, it's the way the light transforms the world every morning, renewing it from the darkness of night. And metaphorically, it's when we are willing to shine the light, to offer hospitality to our wounds, which are often those hidden parts, those hidden places within ourselves, the places we're ashamed of, the places where we haven't been loved, the parts of ourselves that we've exiled because they were unacceptable. And when we make them known by acknowledging them without judgment and without condemnation, in time, they are transformed from shadow to light, and they actually become the gifts that we offer to the world. As someone wise once said, I forget who this is, but our wounds are holy passages. So another take-home point about transformation is that it's about healing. It's about the healing of old wounds. This is how we become mature human beings with clarity. It's how we come to know ourselves, to offering our creative gifts in service to the world. Because when we go down into that unraveling and we surrender, what we bring back from that journey is priceless. It's like gold, and we need to share it with others. Here's a quote from Michael Meade. He says, "When we touch the ground of our being, we descend. We touch into those wounds, and the healing of those wounds reveals our greatest gifts as well as transforms our being." So in this journey, the way we make this conscious is rather than refusing to see, we do the opposite. We open our eyes and we see what is under the persona being that which we show to the world, the face that we show to the world. And what inevitably will come up is grief. Grief for anything that we have suppressed, that we have not metabolized. And part of the reason that this happens, our culture is not fluent in the language of grief. And as a matter of fact, I think there's some real deep-seated fear about grief because it's so powerful. It's raw, it's powerful. And I think that that's part of what happens in this descent is that grief will come up about, it could be any number of things, but I think it's part of the process. And I want to read a quote from Francis Weller. I heard a podcast of him speaking. He just wrote a book called The Wild Edge of Grief. He's a psychotherapist. He just strikes me as a beautiful human being. And he says, "Grief takes us down, but we love things that take us up. The direction of sorrow is to our knees. It's to the earth. We grieve so we can love the world more ardently, that we can look at the world and greet it with gratitude, so that our hearts become more generous and our love quickens." Mirabai Starr says grief is a crucible for transformation. So the point being that grief is one of the potent ingredients in this whole process, the death and rebirth process. Michael Meade talks about the classic example of the caterpillar that becomes a butterfly. So for the butterfly to be born, the caterpillar has to die to what it thought it was, what it was comfortable being, and what it thought it would always be. That was its assumption as a caterpillar. So the caterpillar has to die first before the butterfly can be born. And it has to let go of its life as a caterpillar, but it doesn't want to, because research has shown that the cells of caterpillars resist and attack the cells of the butterfly. So what that means is that there's a built-in resistance to change. This applies to us as well. From a survival aspect, it's understandable that we don't want to let go. As human beings, biologically, we are hardwired for survival at the level of ego. But at the level of soul, as embodied spiritual beings, we long to bring what is unconscious, what is yet to be seen and felt and known into the field of consciousness. And because of that soul longing, we surrender to the process of death and rebirth consciously. We let go. We surrender to being shaken up, to have things turned upside down, and to enter into a period of groundlessness. This is a holy and lawful process in order to awaken and to transform. And we can ask, well, what are we awakening to exactly? Well, many things. We're awakening to experiencing the rich textures of our humanity and all that that encompasses. We awaken to a greater depth of feeling so we can love this world with both its flaws and its exquisite beauty. We're awakening to the recognition of our unitive nature, to knowing that we are truly not separate. And we awaken so that we can love more profoundly, so that we can be courageous practitioners in the face of these chaotic, unstable times we are living through by turning towards what is rather than turning away like we don't want to see it. And from all of that, we awaken to a commitment just to stay present rather than collapsing in resignation and despair or drowning in endless distraction and consumerism. And finally, and very importantly, we awaken so that we can become fully ourselves and discover our unique gifts that we have to offer. It's like that quote from Carl Jung, who says, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." So I want to read 3 quotes and then tie them all together. The first quote is from Francis Weller. I just read that quote a few minutes ago, the quote on grief. He says, "The soul came here for full participation. To be a full participant, we have to open to all of what life brings us. When we avoid sorrow, grief, pain, and suffering, we're living our lives in the shallow end of the pool. The true invitation is full participation, so that we walk our lives here on this earth, creatively, fully, abundantly, intimately, and vulnerably." So if we want this full participation in the deep waters of life, it cannot happen without the process of transformation, I don't think. And then here's a quote from Richard Rohr. I love him. He's a radical. He's a priest. He says, "The human ego prefers anything, just about anything, to falling or changing or dying. The ego is that part of you that loves the status quo, even when it's not working." And the third quote is from French teacher Arnaud Desjardins, who says, "Daring to live means daring to be born, daring to pass through important stages in life where the person you used to be dies in order to make room for someone with a new view of the world." What he is saying is an example of what vertical transformation is. Remember, I was talking about horizontal translation and vertical transformation. What he's talking about, a person with a new view of the world, that is vertical transformation. So to pull all these 3 quotes together, it's not that ego is bad. I think that's a real misunderstanding. We need the ego. It doesn't even have to be transcended for the person we used to be to die, as Arnaud says. It's that ego needs to be humbled. It needs to come to know its place, basically, to learn to be a servant to this higher soul process of the self with a capital S, or we could call it the higher calling of the soul. So in making room within ourselves for what Arnaud calls someone with a new view of the world, we have to relinquish the status quo that ego loves and clings to, which involves letting go. We can't do it without letting go. And that involves sacrificing a level of comfort. And I'm sure many of you can testify to this yourselves. I know that I can. It's not a comfortable process. Think about the caterpillar. I bet the caterpillar was not comfortable dying in order for the butterfly to be born. So there has to be some sacrificing of the kind of comfortable, safe, place that we like to reside in. We like to cruise along. We all like to do that. And what opens the door to this process? There are so many different examples, but like I was saying before, it's usually a situation where we feel overwhelmed. It could be suffering, a great loss, like death, losing someone we love, a divorce, when our children leave home to strike out on their own. It could be a healing crisis or a period of depression or any time we are really suffering. So it's like the glue that has held everything in place, that has kept us feeling put together and secure and comfortable, doesn't hold anymore. And what follows is that if we are on the path of transformation, we let go. We don't try and take the old glue and patch everything up and put ourselves back together. We surrender to it. In other words, we recognize that something needs to fall apart. And sometimes we do too.
When I look at myself in the domain of comfort, and you're speaking about how we have to just not be always comfortable and so on, and I see that everything in my life is about maintaining comfort. The small things that I think might be some kind of a radical stand, like maybe I won't buy all my products from Amazon to save this or that, but I'm too comfortable and I don't do that. So I'm wondering if you can elaborate a little more on the nature of sacrifice other than comfort. Because when I look around and see us, we're privileged human beings generally. We have food, we have a computer, we can come online and get spiritual teachings. But except in the domain of sacrifice of my ego and relationship and so on, my physical comfort is constant. It's just there all the time. Mm-hmm. So as far as the descent is concerned, I don't think I can manage depriving myself of comfort. I don't think I can. I think it would just be more ego if I were to say, well, I'm going to give up Amazon for Lent or something.
I'm glad that you brought that up so some distinctions can be made. We don't have to perfectly give up every single comfort we have. We all need comfort. And when we're going through something significant like this, it's understandable. And I think it's a good idea to have comforts. What I was talking about was there are times when we don't want to change, when we don't want to let go of something that doesn't really serve us anymore. And I think it's up to each person to really know that for themselves and to be able to work with what's not useful for me anymore. What do I need to let go of at this point in my life? I think that there's nothing wrong. We do lead privileged lives. We all do. At least I'm sure all of us on this call do. And there are people that actually have nothing. They have no comfort at all. And wow, we have the privilege to even talk about this, to do this work. We don't have to worry about having enough food to eat, and we have a roof over our heads. We have lives of tremendous abundance and privilege. And I struggle with that for myself sometimes, but it's like we're not all going to be doing the same thing on this planet. And for those of us that are doing this kind of work, we have the privilege of being able to work with these finer aspects of spiritual work. I don't think you need to give up all of these comforts. I think that it's an individual process with what doesn't serve us anymore and what is the divine or what is the universe asking of me in this process? How can I make use of it? How can I look at myself more deeply? How can I become a more deeply loving person? I think that's what's more important. I feel like my priorities are to be aware and to be present to everything that's going on.
I think a lot of people who have actually nothing, maybe they're more happy because they're sitting together with their families, or they have love, or they have compassion, or all these qualities, what privileged people we are, what I never discovered before. So it's like, what is comfort? that has nothing to do with my material world. And the other thing is what change is in the moment too big for me? What is the next step? What do I need still to be grounded? Is this a move or is this not the time to move? I can do baby steps in the moment to adapt to my new life. Yeah. And what is comforting me is like helping me to deal with reality. Whatever it is, what I need, as long as I'm consciously choosing these kind of things that I need now, my movie or whatever comfort is, or going for a walk instead of doing another chore, then it's okay. I would like to establish this kind of softness and compassion with myself in all the changes. And there is enough change going on every minute from the outside. So I need to be very, 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 very gentle with myself in those times.
You made some really good points, and talking about privilege and abundance and all that, in no way is that the same thing as love. For me, what's important is to recognize, to be honest with myself, that there is a kind of abundance. It doesn't mean that if you have all of this abundance, privilege, comfort, that you're not going to suffer. You're going to suffer anyway. That is the nature of being a human being. And the whole idea of impermanence and cycles of this process of birth, death, rebirth, it's initiatory, really. It's got an initiatory quality. And we do need to be soft with ourselves. I was thinking about a time when I was going through the loss of someone very, very dear to me. And I was working at the time, and I would keep it together when I was at work, and then I would come back into my little house, and I would just sit in the chair or sometimes just drop to my knees and cry and cry and cry and cry. And then I would make some comfort food for myself, compassionate with myself, just to allow myself to have something that provided a little bit of solace or comfort. So when I'm talking about here are principles, there's variations. It's not the same for everybody, but it's these principles that I feel like that are what I call initiatory principles.
I think what you're saying is that the path of transformation is marked with initiatory events. And that's what I found for myself. It is not a smooth thing. And rather than letting go, it's been more efforts. There are at least two paths, the path of surrender and the path of will. And so it's interesting to hear you describe the path of surrender. What I think you were saying, it is not one metamorphosis, it is a series. It's going through the seasons over and over. And each time there's an effort required to get to the next level.
It does seem continuous, but there's enough that feeds us that we're willing to keep going. Something draws us to keep going. Maybe it's the experience of love or being that propels us forward, because this process just keeps going on. It's a lot sometimes. And it also seems unavoidable. But there were two things that occurred to me while you were speaking. One is that having comfort and privilege, it seems to be just what is for those of us here in this country anyway. And how to hold that. For me, not to be guilty about that or feel like something is amiss because that's the way that things are, but also in discriminating about how to relate with that, not always to look to satisfy it whenever there's discomfort. Sometimes to just be in the discomfort a bit is useful, not to go for the comfort all the time, but not never also. It seems like it's something that I have to feel into myself. And then the other thing that you were saying that struck me was, or one of the things, It seems to me that it's possible to be a spiritual practitioner on a level that maintains the status quo, to understand the Dharma, to do practices, but to maintain the status quo through that. I guess I would ask, are there ways of challenging ourselves, putting ourselves in positions which are not so comfortable? Or is it even helpful to do that? Is that more ego? Life seems to do it. It's been my experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me just say, even if we don't do it, make the effort ourselves, life will do it inevitably.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's a choice here. There's a wonderful music group called Rising Appalachia. Maybe some of you have heard of them. And one of the lyrics in one of their songs is to fine tune me with patience, and then I'll write you letters of acquaintance. I don't know how it is for everybody, but it seems to me all of the people I know that are on any kind of path of practice, they're just constantly being fine tuned, sometimes with patience and sometimes with radical. And then I was thinking too, all the, the practices and the Dharma and the things we do kind of status quo wise. My experience going through the really harder things is, I mean, if I'm in a death cycle, I don't know, I don't remember, oh, there's going to be birth. It's just awful. I just hate it. But then I have the practice. It's like, well, what else are you going to do? It's almost like plodding along, because what else am I going to do? And then there was birth, but I don't remember that when I'm in the yuck of it. Maybe some people do, but I don't. Luckily, I don't get those big ones too often. Mostly it's fine-tuned with patience.
When you're in the middle of a death cycle, so to speak, when you're really down in the dark side of life, in the unfavorable side of life, it just doesn't come naturally to me to think, oh, there's going to be rebirth, and that makes it easier. That doesn't occur to me. Just being with the grief or whatever situation is deconstructing me is pretty consuming. And to surrender with that seems to be the practice as best as possible.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk about liminality. A couple of people have touched on that. Liminality means dissolution. And in this transformational process, there is a phase of that process called the liminal phase. It's that betwixt and between place between death and rebirth. So it's not just we're descending, and death, and we just bounce back up to rebirth. There's something that happens in between, which is called liminality. And it's a necessary part of the process. It's when the way things have been is dying, but what is wanting to be born has not yet emerged. We don't know. And that's what the liminal state is. It's a state, and we can call it a bardo state, we can call it a threshold state, but basically it's a state or a place of not knowing. And we may feel, and probably many of us have experienced this, that we've lost our way. We're just in unfamiliar territory. And when we're in the state, we're hyper aware of the fragility of life. It's when we start to feel those awkward, shaky places that maybe we hid under the rug when things were going smoothly in our lives. And now these more awkward places, these more shadowy places rise to the surface. And so this is a very good time for reflection, for deep soul reflection, to cultivate intimacy with ourselves and take time to actually let ourselves go beneath the surface into those more awkward, shaky parts of ourselves, like the way David White talks about offering hospitality to them. We're in that liminal state and we offer hospitality to those places within ourselves. It's really a time for prayer, for slowing down, for befriending the darkness. And it's not this really scary, negative place. It's actually sacred. when we are in that liminal place, I would call it sacred, and it offers a kind of respite. It's like we hit the pause button. We allow ourselves to slow down, and it requires superhuman patience. Because again, if we're talking about surrender, and the way I'm talking about it is more about surrender, at least in this part of it, but what we're giving up is we're not trying to power our way through it. We're not trying to fix it. We're not trying to solve it. We're not trying to improve it. We're not trying to minimize it. We're not trying to dismiss it or spiritually bypass it. We allow ourselves to just be there. It's a feminine place of receptivity and waiting. We wait and we wait. Doesn't mean that we're not ever doing anything at all, but internally we're waiting and we're listening. And oftentimes, and this can be a surprise, what arises is actually wisdom. I'm not talking about knowledge or information, but a place within ourselves where we can access our own wisdom. How often do we take the time to do that? Sometimes we have to get to this place where the ground has been taken out from under our feet to get us to really pay attention to ourselves in a deeper way. And this whole idea of listening and prayer and waiting, these are key elements. And sometimes it seems like all the doors on the outside, they're closing shut. The doors externally are closing. But when that happens, sometimes that's when the inner doors begin to open. And if we're trying to power our way through it and solve it and patch it up and fix it and all of that, we're going to miss something in this process that is so valuable. It's so priceless. And it's such a deep place within ourselves. And I'm going to use myself as an example because I have been in this liminal place myself. So basically, a little over a year ago, I decided to retire. I was a physical therapist for 38 years. That's a long time. And I worked full time. And what I discovered is that retirement is a kind of death. And what I died to is the identification with a profession that I studied in depth, that helped others, and that I made a decision and a commitment to practicing as a healing art. So I was on my own a lot of the time, as opposed to working for some really busy, fast-paced clinic. And what happened is not what I expected. I thought I was just going to be grooving on life all over the place, traveling, all this flexibility. I have all this time now. I'm not tied to a schedule. And yes, all of that was true. I was so burnt out working in healthcare, dealing with insurance companies. It was such a relief. So don't get me wrong. There were things that were wonderful that I was really grateful for, that I appreciated. But because I have a sense of this process and I've been through it before, I started to pay attention to what was going on more internally. And I didn't want to just start grasping, like, okay, what am I going to do now? There's a gap here. I want to fill it in with something, and I can choose this and I can choose that. And I just told myself that I was not going to do that. I was going to listen, and I was going to wait, and I was going to be with myself. And one of the things that came up was grief. It's just the grief of letting go of something that I studied and practiced my whole adult life. I really loved being in a profession that helped others in a way of just trying to decrease or alleviate their suffering in some small way. I really like that. And I had just done it for so long that identity was almost fused to me. And then all of a sudden, I didn't have that anymore. And I could have kept working. I could have kept going. I could have gone back to work. There's plenty of work. I could have easily have started seeing patients again and all that. But I made a decision to just wait and to just listen and see what came up. Grief came up. Depression came up. But also, it's been a very creative time. And I'm more coming out of that. I'm more touching into the rebirth phase of it. And you can't predict when it's going to happen, how it's going to happen. It's not like everything's all figured out about it, but I can feel that something is shifting. But I had to work with myself around it because I wanted to fix it. I was uncomfortable. So I hope that makes sense to use myself as an example like that.
I'm 86 years old, and my life has been a life of liminality. Things are falling apart, and new things are happening practically on a daily basis for me and with my friends that I live with and live nearby. It is exactly what you described. There's a creativity to it, and it does have to have stopping and listening and praying and just giving up everything as I thought I was, everything that I identified with and had to give up because I don't have those in my life anymore. And when my husband died, I guess it was a feeling of something falling apart, even though we were ready for it. And I felt like I accepted it. But I had been married for many years to two different husbands that I outlived, and both were very wonderful for me. And it was the first time of living without someone that I feel like this is my person and I can count on you to be there for me. And it's very different now. Liminality does explain a lot of what goes on with me, and it's up and down, and then something new is created. Something I would never even think of before happens in my life. And then something falls apart that I never thought I would lose. Like fairly recently, I almost lost my hearing very quickly. And it was frightening. When you become deaf, it's just so isolating and it's hard to communicate. And I didn't have that one person or my family who has lived so many miles away or not here. I've got wonderful miracles happening with an improvement in my hearing with some new hearing aids, which I never expected, which was wonderful because I have a new life now in a way that I didn't have for a while. I just feel that since I lost this special person in my life, and since all these changes keep happening now for me and the people around me, it is a gift because I'm more connected to the divine in my life in a personal way, with personal help coming from within that I never could have expected, that I would have looked outside myself for. And now I'm finding it within, and I'm finding it with getting to more radical honesty with the people I live with and risking not being nice and maybe making a mistake or doing something that people don't like. Somehow in our spiritual work, we are learning to get through those places and come closer to one another. So I feel a lot of love in my life now, but I just can't count on anything for today, tonight, tomorrow, because so much change, so much birth and death is just constantly happening for us now. It's quite an adventure in a way.
You know, you speak for all of us, and we may not all be the same age, but this is our lives as human beings. And I think as we get older, it's almost like every time you turn around, there's so much of that. I really appreciate how vulnerably that you're speaking. And the liminal state, to me, is where a lot of the work happens. If there's a health crisis or our spouse or our partner dies, there are a lot of things we don't have any control over. They just happen. We're overwhelmed by any number of things. But when we go into ourselves in that feminine place of waiting and prayer and shining the light on those wounds within ourselves, that's the thing about the death process, is that we're just cracked open and there's more vulnerability. And when we're in that state, that liminal state, we can really make use of it. I mean, I was uncomfortable. I really thought retirement was going to be a blast. And one of my friends, it seems like she's having a pretty good time. She retired, but it was different for me. And I think that the more that we can find what you're talking about within ourselves and that connection, that relationship to the divine, then even as things are falling apart around us, and there's all of this loss and all of this impermanence and all of this change, we have something within ourselves, and it's beyond precious.
When you talk about the liminal, you had also said that it was at a very deep, dark place. And I was wondering at first if you were speaking of the dark night of the soul. It's staring into the maw of death, where you could not be there if you aren't able to handle it. I'm not sure how that fits into what you're saying.
That's not what I'm talking about tonight, and it's related to it. It can be, but what I'm choosing to talk about tonight is not that.
One of the elements of transformation is fear. And in the email that I got introducing your talk tonight, there was mention of our current political situation. Mm-hmm. And I have been avoiding feeling the fear that I am encountering relative to what's happening in our world and the grief that I feel around what's happening to people. And I want to address that within myself because what I have been doing is running from it. As an adult, I know that I can walk through that fear, and yet it's not knowing what's on the other side that I think is a lot of the fear that I'm experiencing, not only for me, but for the people I love and for people out there who are losing their jobs and all of that. There's just a tremendous grief that I feel about what's happening. In respect of what you were saying about learning to love what is, I don't know that I will ever learn to love that, but I will learn to accept it on some level in such a way that I can live my life full out. I want to live my life full out.
There's so much I could say. It's something that's on my mind all the time. And I don't think I said necessarily to love what is. I think I said more to turn to what is, to not turn away from it. I can tell you that I hear you and I have the same fears and I'm very concerned, deeply concerned. And I think it's good that it got brought up because it's so big and in our faces all the time.
For me, to be in a dark night, I can't say that I know what that is exactly as an objective experience, if there is an objective experience of that. But I have been in some dark nights too. And to me, it has been a transformational circumstance because it's really forced me to go deeper into myself and to see things about myself that had been hidden. But also, I feel like I haven't always been up to the task. And I've needed some help sometimes, and that's been okay.
So I want to switch gears and talk about transformative moments. Transformative moments are spontaneous moments when we're transported into a state of awe, like when we're moved by something in nature, or it could be a piece of music, or it could be a moment when the separative self falls away and we experience our unitive nature. And these experiences can have a very powerful impact on our lives. They can be a defining moment or a turning point where we see the world and our place in it in a radically different way. And I want to give you two examples of that. I do want to read to you something from Buddhist writer and meditation teacher Henry Shukman. He wrote a memoir called One Blade of Grass. He teaches meditation. He's a beautiful writer and poet and speaker. He's from the UK, and when he was 18 years old, he and his friend traveled from the UK to South America. They were on a gap year from school, and their plan was they were going to write a book, and his friend was going to be the photographer, and he was going to write the text. And one day, one afternoon, Henry, he was standing by the sea. He was just overlooking the sea. And something happened for him. And I would like to read from something that he writes. This is the book, One Blade of Grass. It came out 5 years ago or something like that. So I'll just read a few paragraphs. And when he writes about his experience of this, he writes in the third person. So he says he, but he's talking about himself. He writes, "It was late afternoon, the hour when the sun lowered a dazzling path onto the sea. As he gazed at it, he started to feel unaccountably happy. He had the little beach all to himself. It felt like he put down a burden he didn't know he had been carrying. Something in him rose by itself, as your arms do when you set down a heavy weight. All his life he had been trammeling his mind, he realized, keeping it in channels so it could communicate with others. Now he didn't have to. He was free, totally free, in a way that felt so good he wanted it always. A large old fishing boat was anchored offshore. As he stared into the blinding light on the sea, the boat vanished, swallowed by the brilliance. Then it reappeared for an instant, a black shape, then disappeared, a ghost hull flickering on and off like a stain on the retina. It seemed so beautiful he could hardly comprehend it. And suddenly, all the past months of travel seemed like nothing more than a dreamlike series of images that had passed before his eyes. And the water was fascinating, blindingly white, yet completely dark. Scales of brilliance slid over darkness, so it alternated between thick, matte black and blinding light. But water was transparent, so was air. Yet there the surface was, the sea's skin, thick as elephant hide. What was he actually seeing? As he pondered this question, suddenly the sight was no longer in front of him. It was inside him, or he was inside of it, as if he'd stepped onto the scene and become part of it. He could no longer tell inside from outside. At the same instant, the whole world, around, above, below, the sand, the sea, the light on the water, turned into a single field of sparks. A fire kindled in his chest. His fingers tingled. In fact, everything tingled. The fire was not just in his chest, but everywhere. Everything was made of drifting sparks. The whole universe turned to fire. He was made of one and the same fabric as the whole universe. It wasn't enough to say he belonged in it. It was him. He was it. The beginning and end of time were right here, so close his nose seemed to press against it. Suddenly he knew why he had been born. It was to find this reality. His life was resolved, the purpose of his birth fulfilled, and now he could die happy. He could die that very night, and all would be well. And then one more paragraph. This is afterwards when he was staying in this little cabana. So he continues writing when he goes back to his little cottage where he's staying. And now he writes in the first person. Back in my cabana, I lay on my bunk in the gloom with the wooden ceiling just overhead, while a flame burned in my chest like the flame of my kerosene camping stove, which was fierce but ghostly. It was a fire of love, and it kept pouring out of me. I'd never known anything like it, yet somehow it was familiar, as if it had been with me all my life, just unnoticed. The walls of weathered plywood gleamed in the dark. I lay listening to the rustle and murmur of water outside. Previously, there had always been a limit to beauty, but now it was everywhere. Nothing was left out. All I had to do was lie here, with love pouring out of my breast in a swift, silent stream, like a Roman candle. I felt like I had been claimed by immemorial love. And then there's another example that I like. This is from a book. It's simply titled Awe, A-W-E, and it's written by the psychology professor, Dr. Keltner. And in the book, he writes, "The transformation of the self brought about by awe is a powerful antidote to the isolation and loneliness that is epidemic today." And he tells the story of the scientist named William Herschel, who lived in the 1700s. And when he was a young man, like a teenager, he was awestruck by the moon. He fell in love with the moon, and he would go out every night and walk under the moonlight. He liked to feel surrounded by the moon's light. He was in love with the moon. And along with his sister, Carolyn, when he got older, they built the largest telescope in the world so he could map the movement of the stars and the comets in the sky. And there was this theory at the time, the scientific theory called the fixed stars theory. The theory was that there was a two-dimensional pattern of stars that revolved around the Earth in unchanging ways. But he, along with his sister, discovered that the night sky was this ever-changing three-dimensional space with billions of stars. And so this experience of awe, this moment of falling in love with the moon and being awestruck by the moon actually led to a new scientific discovery that we have this very day. So I want to just give you a couple of examples of what that meant to have a transformative moment. That's another aspect of transformation.
Awe and this place of being in between, for me, has opened up the heart. It's opened me up to prayer, to listening, to the kindness of others that really touched me, and to connection to the invisible that manifests in different ways. And I just call that grace, that I'm even here. The other thing that's helped me through some very difficult transitions has been a sense of agency, not egoic agency, but the fact that I could survive somehow. Because when things are dissolving, there was a time I wasn't sure I'd survive. And I could surrender to that on the one hand, but since I've been through that, the fact that I have survived through grace and whatever else has gotten me wherever it is that I need to be. And I find that's helpful, just as self-comfort is helpful, the comfort of others is helpful, a balance of comfort as we're going through deep grief and a loss of identity, how we're identifying ourselves.
This is a poem by Mary Oliver. This poem is called Messenger. My work is loving the world. Here the sunflowers, there the hummingbird, equal seekers of sweetness. Here the quickening yeast, there the blue plums. Here the clam deep in the speckled sand. Are my boots old? Is my coat torn? Am I no longer young and still not half perfect? Let me keep my mind on what matters, which is my work, which is mostly standing still and learning to be astonished. The phoebe, the delphinium, the sheep in the pasture, and the pasture, which is mostly rejoicing, since all the ingredients are here, which is gratitude, to be given a mind and a heart and these body clothes, a mouth with which to give shouts of joy to the moth and the wren, to the sleepy dug-up clam, telling them all over and over how it is that we live forever.